Meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 15 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration. Today's meeting is taking place in hybrid format. I would like to make a few comments for the benefits of the witnesses and for our members. We have a number of people who will be joining us on Zoom, including one of our committee members, Ms. Zaid. Welcome. For those on Zoom, kindly click on the microphone icon to activate your microphone and kindly mute yourself when you are not speaking. Again, for those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you could use. We would encourage you to use your earpiece and select the desired channel, whether it's English or French. I will, in terms of just making sure that everybody stays on time, I will let you know when you have 1 minute left. And then I will let you know when your time is up and your microphone is shut off. Kindly wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. I will remind everyone to please not speak over each other, as it will be hard for our translators to translate and it makes their job difficult. Of course, please make sure that all your comments are addressed through the chair. And if you would like to speak, please raise your hand. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best as we can. Thank you in advance to everyone for your cooperation. Et bienvenue à Mario Simard.
And welcome to Mario Simard. Welcome.
Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on September 16, 2025, the committee is resuming its study on Canada's immigration system. I would now like to welcome our witnesses for our first panel at today's meeting. As an individual, we have Margareta Dovgal, a public policy analyst. We have Mr. Alan Ralph Bassa, Caregivers Policy Reform Advocate and founder and part of the Canadian Caregivers Assistance Organization. And from Toronto Global Online and via Zoom, we have Daniel Hengeveld, Vice President, Investment Attraction. Welcome to all of you. Each one of you will have 5 minutes for opening remarks, after which we will proceed with rounds of questions. We will go to Ms. Dovgal first for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. And that's working. You guys can hear me? Oh, perfect. Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Thank you, committee members. Pleasure to be here this afternoon. While I am equipped to offer a perspective on Canada's immigration system as an employer and as a policy analyst in natural resources, there are many such perspectives out there. And those ones can speak to the importance of getting immigration right for Canada's economy. Today, I wanted to speak to this issue as an individual, as someone who thinks deeply about these issues, so that I can address the cultural and social dimensions that must be considered in the design and implementation of Canada's immigration policies. The success of Canada's immigration system must be defined by the needs and demands of Canadians. It must be ethical and fair to those seeking to come to Canada for a better life, whether for a short stay or for the rest of their lives. And most crucially, it must be conducive to a high-trust social fabric and cohesive national identity. Perfect unity is not likely in a diverse, pluralistic society, but we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Immigration is about more than just the composition of a fraction of our labour market. In an era of birth rates far below the natural replacement rate, right now we're at 1.25 per woman, the choices of who we attract and how we admit them are essentially creating our future, our social and our demographic composition. There is no values-neutral approach here. And anything that espouses such a thing is conceding to the values of whoever most effectively moves through the system. The values-neutral approach has failed at cultivating public trust, ensuring administrative fairness for newcomers, and advancing a culturally informed view of population growth. It has also empowered those who don't respect Canadian laws or values to behave with impunity, exploiting our immigration process in the system. According to polling conducted by Abacus last month, a plurality, 49% of Canadians view immigration somewhat or very negatively. Only a quarter view it positively. Other surveys point to a more negative view by those who have immigrated in decades past. You will have heard considerable evidence, I imagine through this study, if not prior to it, that immigration programs have been gamified. The rampant side door stream that emerged in recent years via post-secondary institutions is one such example. Living in Vancouver, many of my friends...
Pardon, Madame la Présidente.
Sorry to interrupt. A quick question.
Interprète qu'elle puisse se rendre à la fin de la séance. Et là, je pense qu'elle va manquer d'air si on diminue pas le débit de nos amis témoins. Voilà.
It is true. Even in English, Ms. speaking very quickly. And just for our translators, I'll just need you to slow down a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate that. Gamification is taking place, and it's having an unfair impact on Canadians and also on immigrants who are newcomers. Those who are law-abiding immigrants are being encouraged to consider all sorts of unethical schemes like fake jobs, dodgy refugee claims, and fictional marriages to stay in the country, all under the guise of, well, many others are doing this too. Non-immigrant Canadians are not naive, and they see this happening as well, further contributing to declining trust in immigration. I support the principles that MP Rumpel-Garner intends to advance in amendments to Bill C-12, particularly efforts to ensure that criminals are held accountable for crimes, which is a crucial aspect of ensuring systems functionality. But I would consider the broader questions here too. In lieu of more stats or facts, which I'm sure this committee has heard of a lot, I have a little story to tell. In 2017, I was moving from Ottawa to Vancouver. My moving truck with most of my household belongings was stolen in the Greater Toronto area. And unlike in many of these cases, my belongings were recovered in the Brampton area. I got back my family photos, my mother's ashes, and not all victims of crime are this lucky. There's a reason I share this story. Charges were laid by Peel Police for multiple crimes related to the theft, including check fraud and possession of stolen property. There was a ring of perpetrators, most of whom police told me were foreign nationals. One guy was apparently deported for other offenses before the trial date occurred. Another one was at large and of no fixed address when I last heard from the police, who also informed me that they would be seeking deportation for him as well, if he ever resurfaced. Police informed me at the time that this was relatively common, and that in fact, Canada is a ripe target for transnational criminals, ranging from petty crime to drug, arms, and human trafficking. On top of this, add to this the reality that we are also doing nothing to avoid the import of sectarian tensions. And it is clear that the value-neutral approach to immigration is no longer serving Canadians. My own run-in shattered my sense of security and my trust that Canada is a relatively safe place. The reality is that as a country, we've chosen to... Sorry, do I still have, was my time removed from?
You just have 1 minute left,
okay.
and then if you don't finish, don't worry, there's going to be questions. You'll have a chance to finish that. Thank
I
you.
appreciate that, thank you. So essentially, we've chosen to advance a naive, idealistic view of immigration that assumes that all newcomers are Boy Scouts, that any systems failures are merely coordination or resourcing issues, and that everyone comes here as a blank slate, with exactly the neutral views on everyone else in the country that our own immigration system seems to hold about newcomers themselves. Under public pressure, the federal government is looking seriously at immigration numbers and pathways. That's important work. I encourage this committee to also seriously consider whether the current program design promotes public safety and societal cohesion, and if not, what can be done to improve it. I look forward to your questions, and I thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Dovgal. And next, we will turn to Mr. Bassa for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. First of all, I would like to express my deep appreciation for the honor and privilege to be part of this very important discussion, especially to MP Salma over there who have been helping us for very long years. As a witness in this August body, I am focused to the topic of immigration levels. Yet I believe it is impossible to speak meaningfully about levels without also considering the immigration process. These two are inseparable, and addressing them together will strengthen the position I put forward today. One of the most prominent changes in the 2025-27 immigration levels plan is a reduction in overall immigration targets. The hashtag #InCanadaFocus highlights the government's intent to prioritize immigrants already working in Canada under temporary permits, offering them clearer pathway to permanent residency. But this raises a critical question. Should we be lowering immigration levels, or should we be fixing the system itself? Let me illustrate this with the case of caregiving. Caregivers play a unique and essential role in Canadian society. Yet under the Home Care Worker Immigration Pilot, the cap is set at just 2,750 applications each for child care and home support. As of September 2025, there were 34,000 applications across all caregivers program. From January to December, IRCC processed only 4,200 applications. With a processing rate of only 14%, they will manage to only process another 4,816 applications this year. Meanwhile, the cap for the home care worker immigration pilot remains at 5,500 applications in total. With such limited processing capacity, thousands of in-Canada caregivers' applications will remain in limbo. This plan negatively impacts caregivers not only because of the low cap, but also because Canada's need for caregivers continue to grow. Restrictive immigration levels and slow processing exacerbate existing problems. Many caregivers are forced to remain with abusive employers, enduring exploitation simply because their status is tied to their job. The backlog is massive, and the narrow window of opportunity worsen the situation. Caregivers are not just workers. They are the backbone of Canada's social support system, saving the government billions in social services. They enable families to thrive, allow parents to fully participate in the workplace, and ensure seniors live with dignity. Their contributions strengthen both Canada's economy and its social fabric. I submit to you that the immigration limit and caregiver cap are far too low, and I say this for several reasons. Human impact. Caregivers endure years of family separation, exploitation, and abuse because of limited chance to permanent residency. Labor market needs. Canada faces persistent shortage. Many caregivers are skilled professionals whose education and expertise could benefit our economy if given a chance to transition to permanent residency. Policy alignment. Increasing immigration levels for caregivers aligned with the government's stated priority of transitioning competent temporary foreign workers already in Canada to permanent residency. Systemic challenges. The low cap creates a bottleneck. Caregivers lose status, face financial hardship, and employers are burdened with costly LAMIA requirements. Processing delays make permanent residency feel like passing through the eye of a needle. It is noteworthy to note that Canada's 2025 immigration plan emphasizes two key features: in Canada focus, family reunification. If there is one group of workers who deserves fair allocation under these priorities, it is the caregivers those who have been in Canada the longest, who have contributed immensely to our society and economy, yet remain hostage to an elusive dream of permanent residency. Their prolonged family separation undermines the very pillar of our immigration system, the family reunification. As the legal dictums remind us, justice delayed, justice denied. Colleagues, by increasing immigration levels for caregivers and improving operational capacity and processing times, we can move towards an immigration system that is not only fair, humane, but also effective in meeting Canada's labor and development needs. It is not just about numbers. This is about people. It is about fairness. And it is about building Canada that truly values the contributions of those who care for our children, our elderly, our most vulnerable. I therefore respectfully urge reconsideration of the tightened immigration levels. Canada cannot afford to lose these talents and skills, especially in the face of constant economic trade and challenges it faces. On the contrary, we need a strong and reliable labor force. By supporting caregivers, we secure not only our labor market, but also the very strength of our economy and society.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bassa. And finally, we go to Mr. Hengeveld for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Vice Chairs, and honorable members. It's a privilege to be able to appear before you today. My remarks focus on one part of Canada's immigration system, the business immigration pathways that allow skilled workers, founders, and senior leaders to build companies and create jobs here. Toronto Global is the foreign direct investment agency for the Greater Toronto Area, Canada's business and financial capital, which generates nearly 20% of the nation's GDP. We're a nonprofit organization funded by all three orders of government, and our mission is to attract international companies to establish and grow operations here. When they do, they create good jobs, diversify our markets, and increase prosperity. We help companies expand to the GTA by pitching the region and advising on sites, data, regulations, and partners, often in direct competition with other jurisdictions globally. We do not offer cash incentives as part of our work. When a company chooses the Toronto region, it's rarely because we outspend our competitors, but instead because we have presented a strong value proposition about the fundamental advantages of the Greater Toronto Area and Canada at large. They come for our talent and for the confidence that their people can build stable lives here. Immigration policy can be a key competitive advantage that encourages companies to choose Canada. Since our inception, Toronto Global has helped more than 320 companies land in the Toronto region, creating over 37,000 jobs in sectors like advanced manufacturing, life sciences, clean technology, and AI. They depend on Canadian workers and on business immigration programs that let firms bring in the specialized international talent needed to get operations off the ground. Each week, our team speaks with global firms, comparing Canada with jurisdictions that move senior people quickly and offer clear pathways from temporary to permanent status. Increasingly, these companies are raising concerns and asking us to convey them to policymakers. I'm here today primarily as a messenger for those clients. We are hearing three recurring themes. First, companies worry about predictability at key transition points. Work permit renewals, changes of status from intra-company transferee to permanent resident, and the final steps to citizenship. Companies understand that security and integrity checks are essential. What they find difficult is the uncertainty. Files remain in extended review with no clear timeline or communication. This makes it hard for senior leaders to plan the next phase of growth for their Canadian operation. In addition, for those who have moved their family here, they feel that they are left in the dark about things like schooling and housing. For a person responsible for a Canadian team, that uncertainty becomes both a business risk and a personal strain. Second, our clients highlight the experience of workers who are already here in permanent roles, paying taxes and building their lives in our communities. Many tell us that sustaining these workers should be at least as high a priority as bringing in new ones. They see strong economic logic in creating a clearer pathway from temporary status to permanent residence for people who have already shown their commitment to Canada through stable employment, qualifying salaries, in-demand skills, police checks, and tax records. Third, the current points-based selection system, which quite reasonably favors younger applicants, can have unintended consequences for senior talent. Founders, C-suite leaders, and highly experienced specialists in their late 40s and 50s may find it surprisingly difficult to qualify for permanent residency, even when they are leading major investments. For firms deciding where to locate head offices or global mandates, the ability to secure a long-term future in Canada of this tier of leadership is often decisive. Some clients have suggested relatively targeted improvements. These include clearer communication when applications move into complex security or background checks, service standards that are realistic and respected, and dedicated tools or streams for senior leaders whose roles are central to major investments,
1 minute.
while maintaining vigorous vetting. I want to emphasize that even with these concerns, Canada and the Greater Toronto Area remain highly attractive for our clients. They value our stability, our institutions, universities, and communities. Their message is not that the system is broken, but that improving predictability and transparency in business immigration pathways would strengthen one of Canada's core advantages in a highly competitive global market for capital and talent. Thank you for the opportunity to share these perspectives, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hengeveld. That was just under 5 minutes, so thank you very much. We're now going to begin with the first round of questions. And just for our witnesses to know, it's a total of 6 minutes, so I just asked you to try to be as brief as you can. Speak, not too fast. And to my colleagues, just to try to be pointed with your questions as well. Okay, first 6 minutes we have for Mr. Redekop.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Ms. Dovgal, you've written, I read your article here on our national culture, and under this current Liberal government, we've seen record-breaking levels of immigration and not a lot of planning going into things like housing infrastructure or integration for that matter. So in your view, has this mass immigration approach without a cohesive framework contributed to the social and economic breakdowns that we're seeing in our country?
It's absolutely clear that we have seen this robbing Peter to pay Paul phenomenon taking place, where some of the advantages economically and in terms of demographic sustainability we've been getting from immigration, at least on paper, and then in reality, we've been seeing a lot of the pressures. I also do a lot of housing advocacy, and in cities like Vancouver, rental rates are incredibly unaffordable. We see direct ties with inbound immigration numbers and the price increases you see year over year.
Ms. Dovgal, I'm just going to stop your time for a second. just please speak clearly and as, you don't have to go so slow, but just a little bit slower. Oh, just get closer to the microphone. Thank you.
Sorry, thanks so much. Yeah, no, it definitely, I think there's a phenomenon that you're describing, and it's contributing to cultural breakdown. I think a lot of young Canadians of my generation are profoundly stressed, profoundly anxious about their futures, and it's because we have chosen to fix one problem, which is our collapsing demographics, without doing the deep, necessary, and difficult work of ensuring that the infrastructure is there to support all the people coming into the country.
So do you think that people in your generation are lacking, do you see people lacking jobs and maybe we haven't put the effort into getting those people working in some jobs and sometimes we bring in immigrants in cases where we shouldn't?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things going on. One of those is a competition that comes from immigration. I think it's fair to say that there are definitely examples where we don't have Canadian workers who can do certain jobs, or Canadian workers don't want to do certain jobs, whether they be highly skilled or service jobs, and that immigration is a solution for some of those things, but I think we've been working a little bit too intensely to increase those numbers uncritically, and the result is a lot of those pressures are being felt by Canadians, and that's why we've seen such, abysmally low support for immigration coming out in the last couple of years by the public.
So conservatives have called for immigration levels to be tied to things like our ability to house people, the jobs that are available, healthcare, those kinds of things, rather than some random numbers pulled out of the air or driven by someone else. Would you support this kind of pragmatic immigration policy that prioritizes integration over ideology?
Yes, I would support the idea of pragmatic immigration policies, absolutely. But I think my argument as well has been that we need to not just do it purely with a focus to the economy, because if we do that, we're giving up to the system dynamics, and those system dynamics aren't creating the types of outcomes that we want in terms of the composition and the high trust that I think Canadians expect from our society. And, it's one of the reasons immigrants like my parents come to this country and came here for decades, because they want to be safe, they want to have a place where they can respect each other and live in a pluralistic society. And I think we failed not only on some of the economic components of immigration recently, but also on the cultural components.
So tell me a little bit more about the cultural side then. So, what sorts of things would you like to see different to help us to maintain and to improve the cultural side that you're speaking about?
Yeah. I think the piece that you were referring to earlier, it speaks to the broader kind of approach that we take to Canada's identity. So beyond the scope of this committee for sure, but we need to define what it is to be Canadian, and we are, in a sense, post-national. Many of the people who live in this country come from different places, speak different languages, have different ethnic backgrounds. That is the strength of Canada, but we can't do it in a vacuum where the focus is on, looking with shame and some degree of disgust on how we got here, how this country was founded, if we want to present any kind of unified front on who we are. And a lot of the immigrants that I speak to who are coming here now, they don't see anything to being Canadian beyond just civic values, and to them that's not a particularly strong or compelling case. And I think that's an easy one. No, it's a difficult one, but it's a necessary one broadly. And then as it relates to immigration specifically, I really like the general frame of going after people who are outright disrespecting the compact that comes with immigration. They're not obeying the law. They're launching, fake claims to try to get into the system, and I think those are basic principles-based things that we can do to ensure that the immigration system itself has integrity and reflects the values that Canadians expect it to have.
So to kind of paraphrase what you just said, you're saying that we should be strict with our rules. If you break the rules, if you break our laws, if you don't follow the cultural norms that we have in terms of legal laws, you should be not considered to stay in the country. Is that kind of what you're saying?
That's right. Yeah, I think clear, transparently applied rules are critical, and likewise, it is pretty important that it's not rules in a vacuum.
So, in terms of the this cultural piece, you kind of referred to our previous Prime Minister Trudeau talked about that we're in this post-national world, and you used that word, but you said it could still have value and meaning, and so. How important is that to maintain in order for newcomers to kind of integrate into the what we call Canada?
I think post-nationalism is a reality, but it is not an objective goal, nor should it be a goal. So the way that Canada came together over the last couple of decades, going from a foundation where it was English, French, and there was settlement taking place, and Indigenous peoples who lived here prior to Europeans arriving. The way that Canada evolved was in a post-national sense in the last couple of decades, but that doesn't mean that that needs to be our defining approach. It's a reality that we need to accept, but we also need to create space for important conversations that are happening now about what it means to be a Canadian 2025 onwards.
Thank you, Mr. Radikoff. Thank you, Ms. Dovgal. Next, for 6 minutes, we go to Ms. Salma Zaid.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to all the witnesses. Mr. Bassa, my questions will be for you. I've had the pleasure of meeting you and your members of the caregiver community many times, and I really want to thank you for your advocacy for the caregivers. Caregivers play such an important role caring for our families, for our loved ones. They are skilled workers doing work we can't find Canadians to do. In Budget 2025, our new government recognized the value of personal support workers with a new tax credit, providing eligible PSWs with up to $1,100 annually. So before I turn to the new pilots, the government has signaled its intentions to move from temporary pilots towards a permanent caregiver immigration program in the coming years. Drawing on your decade plus of advocacy, what would the essential pillars of that permanent program need to be in terms of admission numbers, eligibility criteria, and settlement supports so that Canada can reliably meet our caregiver needs for home childcare and also home support workers while treating those workers with fairness, respect, and deserve they need?
Thank you very much. But first of all, allow me to take this opportunity to really thank you for the long time that you have given us your ear and giving us a voice for our struggle for better policies and advocacy. And thank you very much for being with us all those years, Honorable MP Salma. The eligibility requirement for the caregivers to become permanent resident has undergone a long struggle until we have successfully been granted that long appealed for the lowering of eligibility requirement that matches the category of work that caregivers perform. And along that line, by and large, the home care worker immigration pilot has embodied is an embodiment or an answer to the cry of caregivers for a lowered eligibility requirement. However, notwithstanding the lowered eligibility requirement, the dream of a caregiver to become permanent resident continued to be a distant sky, an illusionary gold mine, considering challenges, systemic problem that hinders them from becoming permanent residency. And that is a huge backlog, a very small portion of immigration level, which only constitutes, I think, 0.2% of the national level. And this is serious factor that affects the continuing demand of Canadians for caregivers, for them to fully be in the labor force. And in terms of settlement, caregivers thrive. They don't rely much on government support because they're here to work and they thrive. But the only problem is that very small allocation that is given for the caregivers in the immigration level. And take note that with the 34,400 backlog for caregivers in 2025, and taking into account the for the limit that government have set, which is only to accommodate 14% this year. Now we're talking about only 4,816 caregivers. However, since that has already been filled up, then the 5,500 that was accepted last March in the home care worker immigration pilot will only have 600 of them to be considered, and the rest, 4,900, will go and add on to the 34,400 backlog. And again, as I have said, these are caregivers who, for the longest time, have endured from the hands of abusive employers because they know that there's no other way but to stay with their employers no matter what. And for them not to be accommodated in a very slim, a very tiny level or quota, then they will then again suffer from an expired work permit. They will suffer from the financial burden of the costly process of labor market impact assessment. And this I would like to reveal on the ground. Although it is the employer who should pay the labor market impact assessment, which on average is $6,000, the employers, knowing the desperation of the caregiver will shoulder that. That is not supposed to be. But the caregiver who is clinging on that hope and not losing that employer will suffer the burden of that financial cost plus the work permit, like say 1,500. So these are the things that's happening on the ground. And worse.
Thank you, Mr. Bassa. Thank you, Ms. Zaid. That's 6 minutes.
Thank you.
Monsieur Simard, c'est à vous, 6 minutes.
Mr. Simard, you have 6 minutes. Thank you very much. Simard, the D is silent. Otherwise, it seems to imply something else. I'll give you a couple of minutes to add the earpiece. Can you hear me? Thank you. I appreciated your statement, your opening statement. And you very clearly came back to the issue of integration. I'm going to be speaking to you from the standpoint of Quebec. So raising questions on immigration, particularly for Quebec, frequently creates a reputational prejudice because as soon as you talk about integrating immigrants and limiting the asylum seeker threshold, as soon as we try to do that, we're accused of being racist or having difficulty with people who are different. But that's not necessarily the case. We have to look at the big picture. We have to look at the problem as a whole. Quebec has received more than its fair share of asylum seekers. We had many coming in through Roxham Road. And then we had what Mr. Trudeau did by calling upon immigrants to come to Canada, and that created pressure for public services. We have to be clear on that, and the situation wasn't sustainable. So we do have to deal with that issue. We have to educate, not only educate people in general, but educate elected officials so that immigration doesn't become an ideological issue. That can be quite pernicious. There's also work to be done on the concept of integration. I liked your presentation because you did seem to focus on that. There is an integration problem if people who come here and don't want to live with others. It happens. It's unfortunate, but it happens. And it does take a foundation of identity to deal with that. We have in Quebec a Quebec identity, a very strong national identity. You talked about post-nationalism. When I heard Mr. Trudeau talking about that, I wondered whether he knew what a post-national identity really meant. Initially, that was used by Germany, and we can understand why, given their past, they want to move to a post-national identity. But in saying that in Canada, we're in a post-national identity period, that's wrong. There are Indigenous nations. There's a Quebec nation. There are specific cultures with which and people have to integrate, and I'm glad you pointed that out. I'd like to hear you on the issue of social cohesion, the social cohesion that will be necessary to integrate immigrants. Could you please elaborate on that?
Mr. Simard, for that. I think it's interesting you mentioned specifically Germany. Germany, in contrast to Canada, despite having many surface-level characteristics in common with Canada, has gone to great lengths to prioritize integration as a form and a focus of its immigration policies. They are one of the countries that receives nods and accolades for very compassionately welcoming people, particularly those fleeing war and hardship. By being really, really focused on how they can ensure immigrants are meaningfully participating in the economy. But one of the ways they deal with the cultural integration component is by mandating linguistic identity integration classes. In order to immigrate to Germany, you need to speak German. And I think Quebec's example is an interesting one. I agree with your concerns that within this country and the immigration discourse, particularly in Western Canada, where I'm from, we often miss the Quebec example. But I think one of the ways you do that is by creating opportunities for immigrants to see themselves as Canadians beyond just living here. When my mother was going to school for English, when I think I was in kindergarten at the time, her English language class funding was cut off. She never learned English fully until she passed when I was 19 years old. And that was a good example of my own background, where failure to invest in something as basic as linguistic integration had massive knock-on consequences, because she never felt truly Canadian as a result of it. And I think it spans the full spectrum. It's ways that you can socialize with Canadians, enter the workforce, and feel like you're part of the society in a meaningful way.
Tout à fait. Ben voilà, c'est symptomatique.
Absolutely. And that is symptomatic of other things. In Quebec, unlike what happens in the rest of Canada, where there's a multicultural immigration model, where there's an idyllic vision that no one culture is superior to another. But in Quebec, yes, we are a secular nation, and we are a nation. And these are values that we put forward. It seems that Canada isn't in a position to do the same kind of thing. A language, for example, it's unbelievable that someone would settle in a country and remain unable to speak one of both official languages. So I understand that that touches a chord, given what happened with your mother. So that does strengthen things. I'd like to hear you on that. Thank you, Mr. Simard.
Dovgal.
Thank you, Ms. Dovgal. You could answer in writing.
Identity in Canadian history didn't start with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and we need to not forget that.
Merci.
Okay, merci. Thank you so much. Next, we go to, we're going to begin our second round, which is now 5 minutes, and Mr. Ma is going to begin. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My questions will be addressed to Ms. Dovgal. You wrote in a piece of about the strong national culture. Specifically, you highlighted the pearls of maintaining civic cohesion amid a multi-ethnic society. Please very briefly initially define what you mean by national civic cohesion. And then, in your opinion, how have recent immigration levels in the last 5 to 10 years affected overall national civic cohesion in Canada?
Thank you so much. I'm a historian by training. I became a public policy analyst and commentator after spending 5 years studying, the religions and cultures of East Asia in a pre-modern context. So I spent a lot of time, studying what it takes for a civilization to form and the conditions under which civilization can retain its relevance and strength in a world that changes. And the nature of the changes we are seeing today in the 21st century are truly remarkable. It's a very different world. Things move very quickly, and civic cohesion and identity in today's context has to be about how we maintain a high degree of trust with each other, because systems alone are not enough to do that. People need to be able to trust that the person that they share, a wall with, if they live in a condo or a townhouse, is someone that they can trust to look out for them. It's about trusting that informal systems, like in employment, are going to be fair. They're not going to be baked with the results. So things like that, I think, are crucial and part of the answer. And I think the lack of looking at that as a priority and how we structure our immigration system explains much of the tensions we have seen around immigration as an issue. And it also explains why often when immigrants come to this country, they don't understand why the rules exist, particularly when no one's enforcing them, which is a common refrain you hear from immigrants. You're telling me I could just lie on my taxes? And that's a thing I've heard. It's not that I'm endorsing that view, but it's a thing that a lot of people say because they don't understand why we can somehow simultaneously have, quote unquote, high trust, but also low enforcement. And we're seeing that high trust disintegrate in lifetime right now.
Thank you. So, writing on that, you talked about the culture and integration in Canada. So, what culture demands would you make on newcomers to Canada to restore the value of Canadian citizenship?
Obey the law, first of all. Respect pluralism and respect that people come from different places. And if you bear hatred towards someone of a different creed or ethnicity or linguistic identity that accords with tensions and sectarian divides that come from the place you originate from, you shouldn't bring those things with you to Canada. I think that's a reasonable expectation, and one that unfortunately we have not placed on newcomers nearly to the extent that we could.
Thank you. So, building on that, what weight would you give to residency requirements in terms of language proficiency tests and citizenship tests?
I think I would structure it just based on my own experiences, based on the class of immigration. We see different socioeconomic outcomes for immigrants. I worked at Statistics Canada for a couple of years back in the census of population, particularly the immigration data unit. And I worked on some files where we looked at it's called the Immigration Longitudinal Database. So when immigrants come, their class immigration has a great impact on their overall socioeconomic outcomes in this country, whether they're hospitalized, whether they die early, whether they or their children attain education. And that fact stays with me and I think should stay within this conversation, because if you're imposing linguistic fluency requirements on newcomers, you need to do so with an eye to whether they have the means to afford the types of education that they need to be proficient in a language. So if they're an economic immigrant, perhaps they pay for themselves. If they're coming under family reunification or refugee,
1 minute.
Perhaps the state should support.
So how would you feel if we give away Canadian citizenship without meeting these requirements that you just mentioned?
I think giving away citizenship without considering things like integration, linguistic fit, a cultural fit, is a unique thing in the context of a world that has lots of people migrating at all times. Many other countries, like Canada, are highly desirable places to live. No other countries, unlike Canada, are quite as lax about the standards to which we hold newcomers and immigrants.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ma. Next, we have Mr. Fredgiscatos for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses for appearing today. My question will go to Mr. Hengeveld. Thank you very much, sir, for being here. Your organization is an important one, doing critical work on economic issues, and that's where I want to take my question. Under Prime Minister Carney, the federal government is now enacting reforms, and we saw the main part of those reforms, or a key part of those reforms, articulated in Budget 2025 with respect to the Levels Plan. But under the Prime Minister, economic policy is crucial to immigration. Immigration policy has in the past and needs to continue to always be fundamentally about economic policy and fostering greater economic growth. I wonder, sir, with that in mind, can you give us one or two key recommendations on what you would like to see in our immigration policy that you think could foster further economic growth? I know you've provided testimony here, but it's good to have this opportunity to engage with you and have a conversation around it.
Great. Well, thank you for the question. And I think I'd like to go back to where I started my opening address with regards to business immigration, which is what I am speaking about today. Our clients, it's important to recognize, operate in a competitive environment, as is Toronto Global. When a company is thinking about international expansion, not only is it risky, but they are evaluating a number of other jurisdictions on the merits of immigration policy, access to talent, cost of doing business, quality of life, and ease of capital access. These are factors that play into a variety of discussions and equations. Ultimately, companies factor all of these in when they make a decision. As it relates to your question about immigration policy, we view this as a competitive advantage for Canada. Companies, when they make those decisions, look at that and say, how, as part of my international expansion, can I bring senior talent into Canada to set up operations, to ultimately grow and scale our companies here, and to hire Canadian workers. There is a direct economic benefit to the work that we do and to immigration policy, especially as it relates to hiring Canadians through these means. So I think to answer your question, our recommendations would be through our clients, clarity, predictability, and open communication as it relates to the immigration policies.
Thank you very much. I have about 2 minutes left, and I wanted to ask Mr. Bassa as well. Clearly, caregiving is about providing a social benefit, sir. That is what comes from it in the main. But there are economic impacts, negative economic impacts, when we lack caregivers in this country. Can you just give us an overview on what the situation is in Canada with respect to caregivers or the lack thereof, and how you think the immigration system has helped and, more importantly, can help in this area in the future?
Yeah, I don't know if I hear it right. I have a hearing problem. But I think one thing that the government must also look into is the uniqueness of caregiving job. This is a job that is in isolation. Caregivers is in a workplace, a household. There's no human resource. There is no union. And their vulnerability to exploitation is inherent. So I think the government must seriously consider that, because we actually have a caregiving occupation that is in crisis. As I speak, there are caregivers who are mentally tormented by the pressures that they are experiencing in their household. So the government should look into this and come up with an effective mechanism to address the vulnerability of this type of job.
I understand that, sir. I don't mean to cut you off, sir, but I have, as you just heard, just about a minute left. And those points I don't diminish, but I'd want to ask you specifically. Your view is that the immigration system is key to securing, among other things, caregivers, which are in need in Canada. Can you talk about that? Can you talk about how you continue to believe fundamentally that the immigration system is vital for ensuring that we have more caregivers, which are obviously needed in Canadian society, because sourcing them domestically isn't going to be very fruitful?
Can you...
Okay, sir, I have about 15 seconds, but the immigration system, it's vital for securing caregivers. This is what you're putting to us. We need to continue to look to the immigration system to fill those gaps. That's very clear.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Mr. Bassa. Thank you, Mr. Fragiscados. Prochaine, on a Monsieur CIMM pour 2 minutes.
Mr. Simar, 2.5 minutes. Ms. Dovgal, I don't want to, well, I wasn't an academic, but I want to explain what I meant with the notion of post-nationalism in Germany. It first appeared with a philosopher called Jürgen Habermas, who wanted to establish a kind of patriotism in the 1960s, because certainly they wanted to avoid the word nationalism, because everybody knows what happened during World War II. So Habermas's solution was to say that people who immigrate will give their accord to our system of to our political philosophy. This was taken up, but wrongly. So what we need to do with our immigration system, in my view, is to develop a sense of belonging, develop a common history, develop a term, well, a way of living together, something that we use in too many different ways. And as a Quebecer, I don't think that it's multiculturalism that will take us there. In fact, what it's doing is erasing that common history and erasing those historical ties we have in the way we can live together. So I'd like to hear you on what can help us develop a sense of belonging.
People and being a nation is about more than just living in one geography together. And this is a harder truth to fully roll out in a country that has gone through a period of post-nationalism than if we had never gone this route. As someone who benefited from an immigration policy that allowed for my family to come from Eastern Europe, I'm grateful that this was permitted. But I would note that it is incumbent upon Canadian political leadership now to think seriously beyond post-nationalism, go post-nationalism, and maybe take lessons from places like Quebec that have never given up their faith in their cultural identity.
Merci. Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Simard.
La prochaine, next we have Mr. Davies, and not Mr. Don Davies, but Mr. Davies for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Hengeveld, if you could just sort of quickly give me a brief profile of the companies that you generally speak with that are interested in coming to Canada, and can you break it down by region, just generally?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, the companies that we work with are anything from startups and scaling companies based internationally to what you might think of as Fortune 500s. These are industry agnostic, so we work with companies in everything from advanced manufacturing to food and beverage to technology to, in some degrees, energy. So it's a very wide-ranging group of companies from all over the world. Those markets, I think, which is what you were referring to, typically originate in a great deal from the U.S., a portion from Europe, primarily from the UK and Germany, and then from the Indo-Pacific region, which we would include India, Japan, South Korea, and to some degree Taiwan.
So generally then, what would the average investment be from these companies coming into Canada?
Yeah. The average investment size, measured in terms of jobs, would be anywhere from about 50 to 80 people per investment. Sometimes we have much larger ones. Sometimes we have much smaller ones. Typically, in terms of a CapEx investment, you'd be looking at anywhere from $5 to about $25 million per investment.
Thank you. And over the last couple of years, as the immigration system collapsed from effectively an open border policy, to what we have today, have you seen patterns or changes in the clients and the needs that you're seeing? Have you seen a decrease in the number of companies that are showing interest in coming to Canada?
It works in two ways. So early in the evaluation process, as I mentioned earlier, there's a variety of factors that companies measure and evaluate, immigration being one of them. Changes and challenges with those immigration policies mean that companies may rank Canada lower when they look to make that location decision. The second way in which it impacts businesses is for companies who have established here, have brought in, so have used one of the business streams to bring in a senior leader, are looking at growing their business, but may face some of those challenges, for instance, in converting their one-year visa into permanent residency. And they're then saying, because of these challenges, I don't know if I can continue to grow my business in Canada, and therefore we might see a pause. We might see that a slowdown versus their growth projections, and so on and so forth.
So let me just pick up on that. So you're saying that you have noticed a difference because of the uncertainty of whether these people can actually get permanent residency here?
It's fair to say that the uncertainty, yes, is playing into business decisions.
And has that impacted, in your view, the level of investment that is coming to Canada?
It's impossible to put an exact number on it, given the variety of factors involved. I think it's safe to say, though, that the clients that we are working with and who I am advocating on behalf of today, who are experiencing these challenges, see it as a risk to their growth pattern and are therefore, yes, considering either slowing that growth or potentially pausing it. And
typically in these companies that you represent or help come to Canada, on average, is it one or is it more than one on average of people that want to obtain status in Canada?
If I think I understand your question correctly, how many sort of the number of Yeah. Typically, it's a very small number per investment or per company that's expanding to Canada, 1 to 2 senior leaders. Their goal is to bring their technical expertise, their leadership, and their business model to Canada, establish the expansion here, hire, scale, and bring Canadian workers on board. Sometimes, and in fact, the vast majority, these are fairly temporary, where it's going to be 1, 2, 3, maybe 5 years until they get the company up and running. Once they feel that they've hit that level in confidence, they might then return to their home country.
Oh, so it's a situation then that most of these companies that are coming here, and I'm going to differentiate, these are substantial companies with substantial capital assets. They don't typically stay in Canada then, the leadership that come here.
To clarify, some do. Some may choose to stay here, build a life here, bring their family. Others may choose to return to their home country. It varies.
Do you have any data on that at all?
I think it's safe to assume that roughly 1/3 of the companies that Toronto Global interacts with and brings to Canada access business immigration programs. It's safe to assume that of that 1/3, the majority are using these business pathways and are considering staying as part of that or potentially returning. I'm afraid I don't have an exact number for you right now.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hengeveld, and thank you so much, Mr. Davies. Next, we have Ms. Zaid for 5 minutes, and that will be the
Thank you,
last of our. That'll be the last of our 5 minutes, and then this panel will be completed. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My question is for Mr. Bassa. Mr. Bassa, I would like to ask you a question on the out-of-status caregivers. These are the people who have come to Canada legally, have been contributing to our economy, paying taxes, and have only fallen out of status due to paperwork processing delays or to some language requirements. Do you believe there should be an amnesty or a program to bring these people into status, and what should that look like?
I believe that an amnesty should be given for these caregivers who have fallen out of status because of systemic issues in the processing, which consists of delay, low cap, and therefore the government should address that, because the immigration program and that the government has must be taken into account on the impact that it caused to the caregivers for this matter. This caregiver has spent a very long period of time working legally, and they have complied with all the requirements, but for one reason or another, which is not of their fault, they came here legally. They played the game fairly with the rules that was set when they came in, and all of a sudden they were caught of some requirements, and they were caught on inequitable delay in processing, therefore causing them to be out of status. The government must consider that, and that defines fairness, that defines justice in the immigration system of which Canada is known of. So I truly believe that that must be seriously looked into, because that has happened in the past and that is continuously happening now. When one submits an application, for example, for home care worker immigration pilot, and the work permit given by the government is only 1 year. By the time he or she receives an acknowledgement of receipt, she already has fallen out of status. So there are so multifarious considerations. For example, government should look into the impact of low cap and long processing time as to the situations of these caregivers, and therefore,
Yeah. Thank you. And in Mr. Bassa, the new home care worker immigration pilots that launched in March 2025 lowered the language requirement, and they granted permanent residence on arrival, steps many caregivers have been telling us for a long time they hoped for. From your direct work with hundreds of caregivers and their families, what has been the most positive impact you have seen so far with that? program?
Yes, the program has highlighted the long-awaited lowering of eligibility requirements. The impact is positive, but the system is not prepared for this program, vis-a-vis its capacity to process the number of caregiver permanent residency application and the very limited cap and systemic issues along the way, such as the work permit expiring even before the receipt of AOR. So these are technical things that we should consider. That is a consequential impact of their program. Now, government, for example, should consider that upon the acceptance of their application, they should give these caregivers a provisional open work permit until the government is able to acknowledge receipt of their application, which, by the way, are complete and in compliance with all the requirements. So as to prevent continuous falling out of status of these caregivers who have been awaiting for their permanent residency for 5, 10 years, suffering from legal separation and all this stuff. So again, the impact is positive, but there are technical issues, matters that the government should consider, which they should adjust on the ground in consideration with their limitations as to their capacity to process number of permanent residency applications and the very limited cap for the caregivers.
Thank you, Mr. Bassa. Really
Thank you, ma'am.
appreciate
Thank
your
you.
input.
Thank you, Mr. Bassa. Thank you, Ms. Zaid. Merci to all the witnesses. Merci pour vos déclarations.
Madam Chair,
Thank you
point of
for your
order,
remarks. Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just wondered if Mr. Hennegeld made mention of that he didn't have the stats in front of him. I wonder if he would be able to file a report with the committee to follow up on my question on the number of people who stay in Canada versus those who leave Canada that come in under his investment.
Would you be okay to
portfolio.
provide that, Mr. Hengeveld?
Thank you for the question. I will look in and see if we do have that data. So if we have it, I would be delighted to provide it.
Thank
I'm
you
not
so
sure what
much.
the recourse is here, but
Okay.
I will do my best.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So again, thank you to all the witnesses for your excellent testimony and your contribution to this important study. We are going to suspend for 5 to 10 minutes so that we could transition to the next panel. Thank you. Make sure we avoid any background noise. As well, at the bottom of your screen, you could select the appropriate channel for interpretation, whether you want floor or English or French. And of course, for those in the room, encourage everyone to use an earpiece and select the desired channel. As always, and this is more towards our witnesses, kindly wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. All comments should be addressed through the chair. And now I'd like to formally welcome our three panelists for our second panel this afternoon, our three witnesses for our second panel this afternoon. We have Mr. Doug Parton, Business Manager and Financial Secretary for Iron Workers Local 97. For the World Education Services, we have Ms. Shamira Madamin, Managing Director, Canada and Deputy Executive Director. And for the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, Peter Copeland, who's the Deputy Director of Domestic Policy. Each one of you will have 5 minutes to give opening remarks, after which we will go to rounds of questions. I'm going to begin with Mr. Parton of the Iron Workers Local 97 for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Doug Parton, and I am the business manager of the Ironworkers Local 97, representing more than 2,400 members across British Columbia. Our members build bridges, towers, dams.
Mr. Parton, just if you could pause for a second, you have put something in front of your camera. There you go. That's okay. We prefer to see you.
Sorry.
Make sure that you're not an AI-generated voice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
With a face like this?
Anyways, please continue. We had stopped your time, so you can continue now, please.
All right. So we build LNG sites, public transit, and industrial projects to keep our country and our province powered and moving. Ironworkers take great pride in our craft. We invest heavily in apprenticeship, skills development, and safety. Every person in our craft knows that they're part of something bigger, building communities and building Canada. Our role is to supply labor. That is why this issue matters so much. The temporary foreign worker program, construction stream, was meant to be a last resort when no local labor was available for critical infrastructure. But in British Columbia, and particularly in our trade, it has been used far too often and not as intended. We are seeing employers use the program as a business model for cheaper, untrained labor, not as a measure of last resort. They are claiming shortages that don't exist and using temporary foreign workers to drive down wages and bypass Canadian tradespersons, excuse me, who are ready and able to work. Tradespeople whom invested in their training and their skills development. In fact, the Federal Job Bank wage data lists rates as much as $10.44 below the hourly wage actually paid in our industry. The flawed data leads to bad actors claim a shortage, import cheaper labor, and avoid paying fair collective agreement and PLA negotiated wages. Multi-employer agreements freely negotiated represent an accurate market perception, or they would not be agreed to. This wage suppression isn't just about fairness, it's about the ability to make a living. When federal wage benchmarks undervalue construction work by $10 or more per hour, and it does not consider benefits packages, it only drives down the market. It also leaves workers unable to afford housing, food, transportation in the very communities they help build. The government has defined prevailing wages related to being eligible for investment tax credits, and this is one of our recommendations. The number of TFWs brought in under the construction scheme is disproportionately high, despite strong local workforce and record union training investments. This does not just hurt our members, it weakens apprenticeship recruitment, undermines career pathways for young Canadians, and creates unsafe conditions for workers unfamiliar with Canadian standards and job site expectations. Safety is not negotiable in our trade. Ironworking is dangerous, technical, and demands rigorous training. When the system allows unverified labor to enter work work sites through loopholes, it puts everybody at risk. We cannot compromise safety for cost. Our recommendations are require union and local building trades consultation before approving any trade-related LMIA so that we can confirm whether local workers are available. If there is an available supply, the employer should not be granted an LMIA. Number two, replace the job bank standards with accurate collective bargain prevailing wages that reflect livable wages and real cost living in provinces like BC. Restrict TFW access to employers who invest in training of Canadians and have a clear apprenticeship plan to transition back to a domestic workforce.
1 minute.
Finally, pause any approvals while a review of the new framework is in place. We support immigration done right. We respect every worker who contributes to building this country, but we must ensure the system reflects Canadian values and fairness and opportunity for all. Our message is simple: invest in Canadian workers first, give us the tools and training capacity, and we will meet Canada's labor's needs right away with safe, skilled, homegrown workforce that strengthens our economy and provides meaningful career in the trades. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Parton. Next, we're going to go for 5 minutes to Ms. Madhani. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Shmira Madhani, and I am the Deputy Executive Director and Canadian Managing Director of World Education Services, OS. On behalf of WES, I'm pleased to contribute to this study on Canada's immigration system. WES has been one of 5 organizations designated by IRCC to provide educational credential assessments under express entry. In 2024 alone, WES processed more than 251,000 applications as part of our broader mission as a not-for-profit social enterprise that supports immigrants, refugees, and international students. Today, I will focus on how the immigration system can be renewed and strengthened to support Canada's future. As we know, immigration has been foundational to our economic prosperity and social identity. Recently, however, support for immigration has eroded, and policy responses favor short-term fixes over long-term planning. To build one Canadian economy, we must fully integrate immigrant talent into our labor market and embed immigration into our social fabric. The reality is that more than 20% of Canadians are over 65. Canadians' productivity continues to lag and our GDP is declining, yet we have one of the most educated populations of G7 countries. This is partly because we have such a highly educated immigrant population, where 1 in 3 immigrants are underemployed. We have all experienced a conversation with an Uber driver who is a trained surgeon or a civil engineer or perhaps even a nurse. The scale and scope of this skills mismatch costs us up to $50 billion in GDP annually. As the federal government embraces immigration as a nation-building strategy, Canada needs coherent coordination mechanisms and systematic reforms to ensure that newcomers and all Canadians can thrive for generations to come. To advance this vision, WES offers 3 reinforcing recommendations. First, levels planning must go beyond numbers alone. It must be guided by clear objectives, principles, and measurable outcomes. This can be achieved by creating a new cross-departmental coordinating body, including key federal ministries such as IRCC, ESDC, and Health Canada. A whole-of-government, whole-of-society approach means immigration planning must be part of a cross-functional effort to advance national economic and social goals, including infrastructure initiatives, accessible housing, and closing Canada's skills gap. Second, we must address the mismatch in skills through a national skills strategy that includes immigrant skills recognition and labor mobility. On the one hand, Canada invites professionals in healthcare and skilled trades through our immigration system, and on the other hand, we allow these skills to go to waste. Research shows that 47% of internationally educated healthcare professionals are working outside their field or underemployed. Meanwhile, the federal government anticipates a shortage of more than 117,000 nurses by 2030 and 20,000 family doctors by 2031. A harmonized skills strategy future-proofs Canada's workforce and positions immigration levels planning as a core foundation for population renewal and economic growth. Third, we need a comprehensive transition plan with clear pathways from temporary to permanent residency. The federal government has prioritized permanent immigration as the foundation of its strategy. Yet, there is limited detail on transitioning temporary residents, including how many will gain pathways and on what timeline. Many temporary residents have been in Canada for years, employed, paying taxes, and contributing to the economy. Prioritizing permanent residency ensures a stable system, especially in sectors that rely on temporary workers despite long-term labor needs. Madam Chair, the only way we will build a stronger Canada together is where newcomers can put down roots, thrive in the workplace, and contribute fully to society. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Madhani. Thank you so much. Next, we're going to go to Mr. Copeland of the Macdonald Laurier Institute for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members, for having me. It's my pleasure to contribute. Canada's once strong immigration consensus has unraveled. The 2022 to 24 surge did not create the crisis so much as expose the limits of a worldview that treated openness, autonomy, mobility, and diversity as unqualified goods. A model built on boundlessness has now collided with reality, and we're relearning that people are not infinitely malleable, and societies require shared norms, bonds, and identity to flourish. For decades, policy followed an extreme open society ideal that downplayed borders, integration, and common culture. The result has been diffuse national identity, declining trust, strained services, and civic fatigue. A serious reset must return to first principles, what immigration is for and what kind of society it must sustain. The examples of failure in the present system abound. Canada's increasing reliance on temporary migrant labor has depressed wages in some sectors and entrenched low productivity business models. Employers can rely on a rotating pool of precarious workers rather than investing in training or technology. The post-secondary sector shows a similar pattern. Universities and colleges have become financially dependent on international students, driving aggressive recruitment, inflated tuition, and in some cases low-quality programs and dubious employer and international partnerships. Far from diversity being an outright strength, a recent 2020 meta-analysis estimates that a robust negative relationship between local ethnic diversity and social trust exists in the short term across all studies. This suggests shared norms, customs, mannerisms, beliefs, and behaviors are crucial to the facilitation of everything from basic interactions on the street to broader cooperation, integration, and trust at higher levels of social interaction. And trust data reflect this. Canada's General Social Survey shows generalized trust in people was stable at around 54% from 2000 to 2013 and has now declined to levels in the mid-40s. Over the last 20 years, Canada has seen social trust decline and become more fragmented and fragile, with stronger pockets of mistrust and loneliness in precisely the big, diverse metros that carry most of the immigrant and population growth. One would expect this when the proportion of immigrants as a share of the population rises from 15 to 25%, not including non-permanent residents and foreign-born citizens, as it has from the early 90s to the present day. These pressures are compounded by weaknesses in border integrity, asylum backlogs, inconsistent enforcement, and permissive temporary resident programs have eroded confidence in the system, creating openings for organized crime, trafficking networks, and diaspora-driven political conflict to thrive on the streets of our major cities and university campuses. Immigration has also been used to mask deeper demographic challenges. Canada's total fertility rate fell to an all-time low of 1.25 last year. Immigrants often arrive with stronger family structures, but over time many adopt the same hyper-individualistic norms that suppress domestic fertility. Using immigration to paper over demographic decline is not only arithmetically impossible, it signals that the aspiration to marry and raise a family, one of the most basic and natural human desires, crucial to individual and social well-being alike, is of secondary concern to policymakers. What's more, foundational social goods are weakening under relentless autonomy and mobility. The Global Flourishing Study shows that marriage, family stability, community ties, religious participation, and purpose are central predictors of human well-being. Our fundamentalist commitment to openness, autonomy, individualism, and choice, as exemplified by the values that animate our immigration system, strains several of these pillars simultaneously, and Canada now scores poor on many of them. I will argue that these challenges are not merely technical, they're philosophical. Immigration is embedded in an ecosystem of culture, economics, demography, and identity, so reform must begin with a change in worldview. Diversity is only a strength when embedded within a unifying framework. Our original vision for multiculturalism understood this, as Michael Bonner notes in a piece for the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. The Royal Commission that preceded the development of official multiculturalism mentioned the term only twice and stressed the idea of acculturation, emphasizing integration of immigrants into a Canadian way of life and a harmonious system that could achieve unity in diversity, advice not heeded in the development of the official policy. I think we should look to the Danes, who have a fairly restrictive, tightly managed immigration integration regime. They limit inflows, especially of asylum seekers and low-skilled migrants, and they make long-term residence and benefits conditional upon integration, where immigrants must demonstrate labor market participation, self-sufficiency, and civic conformity. The rationale for the policy explicitly links immigration control to preservation of their social welfare state, recognizing that unrestricted immigration can strain social solidarity, redistribute burdens unfairly, and erode trust and cohesion. Immigration can be a profound source for good if we consider the pace, scale, and the promotion of social trust and integration to a much greater degree.
Thank you, Mr. Copeland, with 4 seconds to spare. And now we're going to begin our first round of questions, which is 6-minute rounds, and we begin with Ms. Rempel-Gardner.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start with questions to Mr. Parton. Mr. Parton, in early September of this year, you were cited in a news article where you gave a quote that said, "You bring TFWs in for 50% wage and outbid employers who have been supporting apprenticeships, investing in Canadians to train the next generation of construction workers. You lose out on the bid because you're not competitive anymore." So this committee often hears testimony that we need to sustain the high levels of immigration that Canada has seen over the last several years. But I find that incongruent with data that shows that we have a serious youth jobs crisis. Can you expand on the statement that you made and talk about why it is important to scrap the TFW program and perhaps why it's more important to be training Canadian youth and looking at productivity measures within and incenting productivity measures within industry rather than relying on immigration to address some of these gaps?
Well, it is, yeah, absolutely. So when I said, $10.44, that's ERSD's model or wage that they think an iron worker's worth. Certainly in our union, it's upwards of probably it's in the 50%, 45 to 50% higher wage bracket. I would talk about in the last 12 months the work that my local's done, specifically in attracting young Canadians, young ladies, and young fellas to come in what we called boot camp, where they'd spend 2 to 3 weeks, kind of a pre-apprentice type, earn while you learn. Of that, we ran 140 young ladies through and young men through. 102 are still with us. It was an 80% retention rate. All of those young people have out to work for $30 an hour as a starting wage, and they all entered into the apprenticeship. And when we talk about temporary foreign workers, I think the median wage for them was in ironworking was $30 to $31 an hour. Well, why would I, as a young person, start out at the 30? If that was the top wage I'm going to get as a journey person after taking all this training, why would I even enter the trade when I could, go to Tim Hortons and
can I
make
interject
$18,
just for
Yeah.
time? So we often, there's a canard, or like there's a bit of a fallacy, I think, that, or there's this perception that high levels of temporary foreign workers, whether they come in through the traditional TFW stream or in unsustainable levels, through student permits, that they don't take first job opportunities from Canadian youth. Do you think do you think that statement is true, or have what you've seen in your union, does it actually show the opposite, that it actually in fact does take opportunities from Canadian youth?
It does. It cuts the legs out from underneath the apprenticeship system as well. You know, in 4 to 5 years ago, 80% of all the TFW ironworkers came to BC. It was statistically impossible that somehow British Columbia was living in the Goldilocks zone. It became a business model of low wages. And when you're paying low wages, say in Burnaby, the city of Burnaby, if you Google it right now and say, well, what do I need for to afford rent in the city of Burnaby? It's about $42 an hour. So not only were we undercutting wages for everyday work Canadians, we were also doing a disservice to the TFWs as well.
So just to be clear, you would advise the committee to recommend to the government to scrap the TFW program and reduce other forms of temporary work permits in lieu of perhaps focusing more on apprenticeship training and securing opportunities for Canadian youth. Is that correct?
Yeah, again, I'd go back to my recommendations.
Thank you. With the time I have left, I'm going to go to Mr. Copeland. You talked a bit about the Danish model and the need for integration. It's sometimes a taboo topic, but I think we are starting to see a loss of cultural cohesion in Canada. We have to be very sensitive about how we talk about that so that we're not, eroding Canada's pluralism through the discussion. But we also can't assume that Canada's pluralism is going to be maintained without having the discussion in a structured way. So you talked about the Danish model.
1 minute.
With the time I have left, could you give a few recommendations to the committee, and then also would you be willing to put in additional written recommendations on how to achieve the integration that you talked about in your remarks?
Yeah, certainly I'd be happy to provide additional written recommendations, and I would agree that it's a very fine line to trot. And when I think about integration, certainly we have to ensure that there are responsibility and duties out on the part of immigrants, but we also need to provide adequate support. And I think the Danish model is interesting in that it makes the receipt of certain benefits for both temporary classes and then permanent residents conditional upon certain things. So for temporary, they actually have to demonstrate their own capacity to provide for benefits of various types, so social services, healthcare, what have you. And for long-term permanent status, they need to demonstrate consistent labor market participation and civic literacy and language acquisition. So these are things. Denmark is a country with an integration act. There are a number of other countries like Canada, peer nations like Netherlands and Germany that have things like this. I think it's something we should look to incorporate into perhaps our Multiculturalism Act
thank
or
you, Mr.
Citizenship.
Copeland, and thank you, Ms. Rempel-Garner. Next, we have for 6 minutes, we have Ms. Zuberi. Mr. Zuberi.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to the witnesses for being here today. I'm going to start with Ms. Madani. I hope I pronounced your name correctly.
It's Madani, yes.
Madani. Thank you. And I really appreciate your testimony and what you've shared with us, and also your expertise within the field in terms of helping newly landed people be well employed within Canada to the appropriate level of their training and background. So that's really, I think, very salutary and an important mission of yours. In our budget of 2025, our federal budget, we have a new program called the Foreign Credentials Recognition Action Fund, which is being funded to the tune of $97 million. And this fund is speaking to what you were actually testifying around. And how do you see this fund helping out with what you've highlighted, which is ensuring that newly landed people, immigrants, are well employed, properly employed, and fully employed within their fields?
So the $97 million is a good step in that there was funding provided. However, what's going to become really important is what's missing is the fact that we need to have a harmonized system where you have licensing processes that are clear to individuals, newcomers before they come and after they arrive, and that you need to have coordination between federal departments, the province, and the licensing bodies so that they're working in concert, so that an individual who comes here isn't struggling to figure out where they get the information from and how they're going to get licensed and the timelines. And so I hope that the $97 million goes towards systemic approaches where you have national and harmonized standards. An individual goes to the province of their choice. They're able to tell really quickly how long it's going to take and the license that they get, and then they can contribute to our economy straight away. So good first step, but systemic approaches, harmonized standards, basically at the national and provincial level in collaboration with the licensing bodies.
Certainly, and the fact that you're testifying to this, I'm sure if it hasn't already, it'll help sharpen and highlight the fact that these monies that are earmarked should be going to exactly what you said, which is working with the provinces and the licensing boards, which are regulated by provinces. And being from Quebec, I know there are about 40-odd professional orders that are regulated by the provincial government, such as accountants, lawyers, doctors, nurses, many others. Of those professions, multiple professions within each and every province, which ones do you suggest be prioritized?
So at this point, what we know is that our demographic profile is showing that we are going to have, 1 in 3 individuals who are going to be retiring from the country and basically from the workplace. And so where I would see is as we have an aging population, the health sector is where we will have health shortages. We know that individuals, the federal government has made healthcare professions a priority. So where I would see as a priority would be physicians, nurses, and adjacent medical professionals, med lab technicians, etc. The second would be teachers.
Certainly, and I mean, physicians are a challenging one because those are always orders that are very, very careful in terms of broadening admission. But aside from what you said already, there are credential recognitions that are needed, and in order to have skilled professionals enter fields. Do you have anything else to add to reduce those delays for credential recognition within specific skilled fields?
Sure. So the whole issue of academic credential recognition has been resolved. That's what World Education Services does. What we have is an issue of skills recognition, competency assessment. And that currently is a gap where we don't have standardized tools in a way to assess somebody's credentials from an experience perspective. And so we start using proxies like you don't have Canadian experience. What we need is tools that are standardized, using technology to understand how somebody's skills can basically be transferred to the Canadian context in the workplace so they can quickly get licensed and start working. That's a gap that needs to be addressed.
One minute, please.
Thank you. And so if you want to elaborate a bit more on that, you mentioned that there are, for the skilled professions, things are happening, but you identified for outside of academic credentials that there needs to be a validation of previous work experience and how to translate that into an understanding that we in Canada can appreciate. Do you want to add a bit more about that, how that can actually be done?
Sure. So what you need is basically a skills recognition process that are faster, fairer, and transparent. You need to have harmonized requirements across the federal and provincial government licensing bodies. You need to have cross-government collaboration so that you don't have immigration working separately from health and licensing bodies, and you need measurable outcomes. So it's a skills framework that needs to be put in place so that everybody's working in concert versus immigration, labor market, health working separately. That's what needs to happen, is a skills recognition framework.
Thank you so much, Ms. Medhani, and thank you, Mr. Zuberi. And Ms. Cody, I just want to say a warm welcome to you. I didn't realize that Mr. Redekop-Hadlef, but you are warmly welcomed. Monsieur Simard, 6 minutes. C'est à vous.
Mr. Simard, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Copeland, I just want to check with you that the interpretation is working properly. You won't be hearing my own raucous voice, but the dulcet tones of the interpreter. Yes, I see that you can hear. Yes, I am using the interpreter, but I can also speak French. Yes. I will answer in English, though. Right. In your opening statement, you talked about multiculturalism and to the Laurendeau Commission. Just a bit of history. The Laurendeau Commission was intended to define a Canadian identity based on biculturalism and bilingualism. In the end, biculturalism was set aside. For multiculturalism, that was an initiative by Pierre Trudeau, who didn't want to give constitutional space to Quebec. But what history has done is that we've turned the page on culturalism and focused on biculturalism rather, and focused on a system that is now called multiculturalism, where all cultures are considered equal. But when you recognize all cultures as equal, it means you actually recognize none of them. And that is a bit of a problem. I believe that in establishing a system to integrate immigrants, multiculturalism is not sufficiently effective in helping to create a collective identity. My own political training has led me many times to introduce a bill to take Quebec out of the multiculturalist system so that we can set up our own integration system. And in Quebec, we call it interculturalism. Interculturalism in Quebec is based on a common foundation, a common language, which is French, principles that cannot be set aside, like secularism, equality between men and women. And to be a Quebecer, you have to subscribe to those principles. Now, do you not believe that each province should, in a Canadian federation, have the possibility of setting up its own integration system? Would that not make it possible to come up or end up with better cohesion, a better sense of belonging? Is that not a way of coming to a solution?
Thank you for the question. I think the rest of Canada has much to learn from Quebec's approach to creating, sustaining, maintaining a strong national and local culture. I think that what you reference in Quebec has in fact been found in other countries that I mentioned briefly in my last response. They either have distinct acts that promote certain things and tie requirements to integration and the receipt of benefits and things of this nature. So I think there are many different ways in which provinces can achieve and have strong local or provincial cultures. So I would say that Canada, through its Multiculturalism Act or through amendments to other legislation like the Citizenship Act, could indeed adopt some of the things that Quebec has done, I think, successfully to promote cohesion, shared identity, and common values.
Les valeurs communes. Oui, je vais vous raconter.
Common values, all right. I'll tell you an anecdote and see how you respond. In 1988, I was a student at the University of Ottawa, 1998 rather, and we were presented with broad-ranging Canadian research intended to define what a Canadian identity was against the backdrop of the U.S. So what was a Canadian compared to the U.S.? When you ask a Quebecer, the answer is simple. They give in this order language, then culture, and oddly enough, as a third answer, our television series, our soaps. But when you put the question to an English Canadian, he'd say that what makes the difference is my healthcare system, which is culture, and then we don't have a melting pot, but we have a multicultural society. So shouldn't multiculturalism, or doesn't multiculturalism make it rather difficult to define what a Canadian identity is and how it's articulated? Nobody really wants to go through that process of reflection because it would be going against the dominant thread, which is we have to be open to everybody else, we have to let other people transform us, and we have to be an open society that doesn't oblige anyone to integrate. But I'd like you to give us some indications, because even after 20 years, I've been trying to see and understand what the Canadian identity is.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think we have seen, a kind of flash in the pan here in light of U.S. aggression here, the kind of Anglo-Canadian identity flare up as precisely anti-Americanism, and beyond relatively trivial and kind of thin commitments to, hockey, politeness, kindness, maple syrup, and things like this, English Canada has a rather thin identity. And I think it's precisely because we emphasize all of these procedural commitments to openness and diversity. And I think when you do so, we end up in a situation where I think it's true for a lot of the kind of cosmopolitan professional managerial class today, where they belong anywhere but also nowhere. And in fact, that's it's not consistent with human anthropology. Like, people need bonds, they need friendships, they need commitments, and these things to be stable over time. And they have to be, you have to be committed to specific people and places over time, and specific values, and not others, while also being accepting and tolerant. They're in no way inconsistent with that. I like to think
Mr. Copeland,
we should...
thank you so much. We're way over time, but thank you so much, Mr. Copeland. Maybe you can continue in the next chance that you get a chance to respond. Next, we're moving to 5-minute rounds, and we begin with Mr. Ma.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is for Mr. Copeland. Mr. Coleman, you wrote a piece in Without Diminishment, citing the Global Flourishing Study. You highlighted that the strongest predator of flourishing are stable families, marriage, religious participation, meaningful work, and strong communities. Leading up to that, do you agree that our national level of immigration should be tied to housing, healthcare, and job considerations in tying all that together?
Thank you for the question. I do think that our annual immigration plan should be informed by information such as housing completions, rental rates in major metropolitan areas, things like social service availability, how available are healthcare services, and what have you in in areas where immigrants want to migrate to. I think we can also look at social trust barometers. Again, the General Social Survey does have some information on this. It could be packaged and produced better and updated more frequently. I think these sort of things would establish a baseline and then trends that could help inform levels planning. The more information, the better.
Thank you. You also wrote that the flourishing requirements commitment to people, place, and tradition. So again, in terms of traditions, what weight would you give to residency requirements, language proficiency test, and citizenship tests?
That's a great question. I think more weight should be given to them. I'm not going to come out with a number here, but I think very clearly we're in a situation right now where the balance lies away from those things. And I think we need a greater balance. So that's what we should be aiming for here. We should study the matter further and reflect upon that and aim to stress these things to right the balance.
Thank you. And you end off with the article stressing that both policy and culture should cultivate dependencies rightly ordered to family, community, and nation. Can you elaborate in more detail the relationship between the current housing crisis and the failure of family formation?
Yeah, certainly. So it is certainly a factor cited that the inability to secure housing is one factor among many that is deterring family formation, and we have an all-time low fertility rate. It's something that has economic, cultural, and social consequences. And so I think we need to be mindful of these sorts of things and not neglect kind of the struggles of some of the domestic population in our immigration planning.
Would you say that may lead to dilution of the values of being a Canadian?
What would, sorry?
Sorry, if immigrants and others coming into the country, would they actually lead to any kind of dilution of our Canadian values?
I think it really depends on a number of things. It's about pace, it's about the scale, and it's about the stress on integration and also the supports provided. So we have to look at these things all together, and I think the extent to which trust is improved or decreases is a result of many factors. Some of the other big influences on social trust are rule of law, adherence to the rule of law, its predictability and consistency, the degree to which people believe burdens are shared reasonably and systems aren't being exploited, and both of those things I think are affected by Canadians' perceptions and the realities of various parts of the immigration system.
Thank you. Very short.
No, sorry,
question.
Mr. Ma. Thank you, Mr. Copeland. Thank you, Mr. Ma. Next, we have Ms. Sodi for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. My first question is for Ms. Madani. You've highlighted that helping immigrants already in Canada to fully use their skills is just as important as managing immigration levels. With recent government measures like the Foreign Credential Recognition Act Fund, settlement programs, and the New Levels Plan, how do you see that these initiatives helping immigrants contribute more fully to the Canadian workforce and society?
Sure. So as I said in my opening remarks, when you have such a significant number of immigrants who are highly skilled, who are not working their profession or underemployed, that actually basically means low productivity for the country. And you've heard of the recent report where people are leaving. So from my perspective, when we look at the whole issue of immigration planning and those who are here, these are two separate processes. Immigration planning, and it's the people who you bring. You've got to be careful in terms of giving them proper information, and once they arrive, providing the supports. For the individuals who are already here, and we have a very significant number of individuals who are already here, immigrants, not working in the fields, what we need to do is to make sure that we have standardized processes that are harmonized, especially for those in licensed occupations, so that they don't get invited to come to Canada, they go to a province, and that they're not able to work. And so what we need is a skills recognition framework where a coordinated approach between the federal government, provincial government, licensing bodies, where they have a skills recognition framework, they get the license, they're able to work.
Okay, thank you for your answer. I kind of want to just do a little bit of a follow-up to that last part that you said. In addition to what you already mentioned, what other metrics or indicators should the government use to know whether programs aimed at improving immigrant skills recognition and labor market integration are working?
So basically, we need to make sure that the individuals who we are inviting to the immigration process express entry, that we understand that when they're getting here through category-based, that we know whether they're actually going to get licensed or not. Because what we know is that when they come, they're not getting licensed. So the first metric would be you're inviting people in a particular category, what is happening to them? Two is that for those who then end up coming to a particular province, are they able to enter the occupation in a way that assesses their credentials and skills so that they get licensed? So it isn't more barriers and duplication of language and basically training, that there are opportunities for them to understand that they can take a bridging program and immediately move into getting licensed and working. And then the third is making sure that for those who are already here and in the workplace, that they are not basically underutilizing their skills. So that if they're coming in as an engineer and in the workplace, they're not just doing data entry, that there's a recognition program in the workplace to understand what skills they bring and how to basically leverage the skills for the organization.
Thank you. Madam Chair, how much time do I have? Okay, perfect. My next question is for Mr. Copeland. In an article for the Hill Times, you stated that rebalancing intakes to align with absorptive capacity are essential if immigration is to remain both effective and publicly supported. The new levels plan in Budget 2025 will reduce temporary residents from 673,000 to 385,000 next year and lower permanent residents to 380,000. What more would you recommend to continue strengthening the security and the integrity of Canada's immigration system while still welcoming newcomers?
40 seconds.
Thank you for the question. I would reiterate that it would be appropriate to start tracking information related to absorptive capacity and to make the annual immigrations plan reflective of that. I think we need to look at phasing back to numbers that we saw 5-10 years ago in the various categories. I think these are good first steps, but we need to bring volume down further. When it comes to border security, I was very pleased to see the government leave in the asylum components of the bill and some clauses added through the clause-by-clause process. I also think it's important to strengthen Canada's overall border security regime, and that would include pursuing the lawful access regime that was removed from Bill C2. As our Five Eyes partner nations all have lawful access regimes, and so Canada remains a laggard and a standout in this regard. And
Thank you, Mr. Copeland. Thank you, Mr. Copeland. Thank you, Ms. Zodi. And après, on a Monsieur Simard pour...
Mr. CIMM, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Copeland, we could perhaps continue the discussion we were having earlier with a few notes of caution in trying to define the Canadian identity. I think we have to be very careful when speaking of immigration because a reputational prejudice harm happens quickly enough. In Quebec, we've had discussions on immigration and said, should we not establish thresholds? Should we not consider integration policy? And we're seeing this from within Quebec. In the rest of Canada, we seem to have the reputation of people who are not welcoming. And in fact, it's quite the opposite. If you look at the number of hate crimes, Quebec is really at the lowest end of the scale. So we do have to be careful nonetheless. And no doubt you've seen the accusations of nationalism when we talk about our national plans, as if nationalism were a word that was cursed and a word to be avoided. It remains, however, that we have an obligation to define for Canadians, I think we've done it for Quebec, but for Canadians to define what Canadian identity is. It's clear to the someone who's from France or from Germany, but it does seem to be a problem for Canadians. You have 20 seconds a minute. Thank you.
Increased civic literacy would help Canadians better understand aspects of our legal and political systems that are really major standouts on the world stage, such as our Westminster parliamentary system. Our peace, order, and good governance. We have a best of both worlds approach. I think with our legal system, we have parliamentary democracy, and we also have strong rights protections. So I think of Canada as a very measured, balanced place, but I think we need a better articulation of what specific things make us that, rather than just stressing procedural things and toleration and things of this nature.
Thank you so much, Mr. Copeland. Merci, Monsieur CIMM. And I'm just going to give, because we've run out of time, I'll give 2 minutes to Mr. Davies and 2 minutes to Mr. Fragiscatos, if that's okay. And then I have 1 minute just of committee business to make sure that everybody's on the same page as we wrap up before the holidays. Mr. Davies, 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Parton, I'm interested in discussing with you as you know, Canada lags behind in productivity quite substantially in the G7. And that results as a result of lack of capital investment. And you made some earlier comments about temporary foreign workers and the wages that are much lower than what normally would be the case. Have you noticed an impact in productivity since the changes in temporary foreign workers? And what would you recommend to the government going forward for improvements for capital investment related to trades and the changes in immigration?
Well, that's a mouthful. Yeah, I have seen.
Sorry.
We have seen a lack of productivity, and specifically in the field of ironwork, and we see it in the rebar sector, specifically in the residential commercial, where you have your $1 million condos that are being built downtown Vancouver and Burnaby and throughout the Lower Mainland here. But I would say of that, when the TFW or the temporary foreign worker reaches their permanent resident status or are lucky enough to be on an IEC visa, I've had 665 walk through my door from October 24th to October 25th, and we take them out, we assess them, and this was supposed to be the skilled worker shortage that we heard. When we assess them, they can't even put the rebar belt together. So they've been used as, pardon my, I hope I don't offend anybody, but as pack mules, and it's not right. We've done a disservice to the TFW. We've undercut Canadian wages, and now I'm left with a decision whether to keep the permanent resident and upskill them, or should I be invested in Canadians, right? So we're kind of in this endless circle. This problem's not going to be solved overnight.
Thank you, Mr. Parton, and thank you, Mr. Davies. Yes, 2 minutes goes very quickly. Mr. Fragiscatos, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. For the analysts who will be preparing the report, it will be very helpful if each of you was to give in 1 or 2 sentences your main recommendation here today.
We'll start with Ms. Manami, please.
Madhani, yeah. We have to approach a holistic approach to immigration and immigration planning. It can't be just about numbers. It has to be a systemic approach, a thoughtful approach with coordination between the federal, provincial government, and the licensing bodies. It's really important to have a coordinated, systemic approach.
Thank you. Mr. Parton, next.
Real quickly, I would say, if and when the time comes that we need temporary foreign workers in the field of construction, I would say pay them accordingly, even potentially pay them higher. That way, we're not going to undercut the Canadian apprenticeship system, and we're going to ensure that if it is only a temporary issue that we're going to solve, that the employers would take care of that. If it's truly nation building, then we're going to get the best of the best from around the world.
Thank you, Mr. Copeland. 30 seconds.
I would say that we need to rebalance our system towards the promotion of social cohesion, coherent national identity, shared values, and to do so, we could explicitly legislate or through regulation promote measures to strengthen integration, make various types of residency conditional upon meeting certain metrics, and ensure that we are linking our levels to absorptive capacity, whether that's economic, housing, social services capacity, and language acquisition and civic knowledge.
Thank you so much, Mr. Copeland. 2 minutes, perfect. Thank you, Mr. Fragiscatos. And I want to thank the witnesses for their excellent testimony, for their great recommendations. I think we had 2 great panels today, and I think very important testimony and great recommendations we're going to talk about next year. I just want to, so thanks, witnesses. I'm just going to talk to 1 second just for committee business. The clerk distributed a new calendar on Monday. So we have... the clerk has written here we have 4 meetings, but I think we have 3 meetings set up. That's okay if they're still on. There's 3, I think we really have 3 meetings left. We have one, actually no, we have one just this Thursday and next Tuesday. And then I think the last one, I think we've determined we will not be sitting on December the 11th. Do I have that? No, sorry, we have next week, which is the 2nd, then the 4th, and then we have the 8th. Okay. Sorry, the 9th. So we have 3 more sessions left, but not the last one. So I hope that's okay with everyone. We will not be sitting on the 11th. Well, Mr. Ma will be disappointed. I will also just, I think you all know this, the minister and officials will appear for 2 hours on December the 4th on levels and supplementary estimates. And let me see what else. We do have panels set up for next Tuesday. Please, conservative team, get in your witnesses ASAP today so that we can make sure that we add a couple of your witnesses to the panels on Tuesday. We have the minister next Thursday, and then, of course, you'll give us some additional witnesses hopefully shortly thereafter so we could get them in for our December 9th and last meeting, which I have ordered some Christmas-related hot food for all of you guys. So I think with that, there's nothing else on our agenda. I call this meeting adjourned.